Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. Something that I'm really fascinated with exploring and maximizing in my own life is this concept of getting my pleasure from something that's an authentic soul pleasure and human pleasure rather than being kind of immersed in biochemical rewards that I'm kind of not in the driver's seat. It's kind of the ways that we move impulsively. And so in understanding that, I've found it really useful and interesting to back up into some of the neuroscience of what we get reward chemistry for and really see where it ties into being super advantageous as a hunter-gatherer person. So across the board, I would say that our instinctual impulses need adult supervision. And if you don't recognize them and you don't move in the way they encourage you to, they can create a lot of anxiety and tension. And part of being at choice and maximizing happiness and moving through the world in a discerning way and having to not have to work harder than I need to for the point at which my efforts would make money or create health or create relationship because I'm at that enough place. For example, the instincts just don't really have an enough switch. And then understanding how those biochemical rewards in our brain get constantly hacked by the modern world to make us move in ways that maybe aren't authentically aligned for us. And I just find this interesting, and I like to notice when I'm, going to Facebook over and over again and poking at it for some kind of reward. Occasionally when I'm kind of tired and frustrated and moody and don't really want to focus on something, I might be drawn to online shopping even when I don't have a goal of something. I'm like, let me browse my wish list and see if there's a price point thing that the pleasure would, still be responsible within my budget. And if I go looking for something, if I'm on a mission, I've recently decided that I've had this idea of wanting to try some quilting, and recently, started reading a book that I had from a long time ago, and there's this stitch guide thing, and I'm like, tally ho, on to Amazon. I'm gonna find the thing and have it shipped because, that was something that would really be supportive of the project. But when I'm looking at Etsy or shopping for the joy of it, that's a reward chemistry. On and off, I do online dating, and when I'm pushing refresh, but I'm not actually having meaningful conversations with the people who reach out to me, I'm just in the who's paying attention to me now. I can see where there's a lot of potent reward because for how much we're hardwired for survival, I think our many times ancestors didn't come from people who were like, meh, sexual attraction, not that big a deal, not that interested, They may have been our spiritual ancestors. They may be ascended masters that are part of our soul team, but they surely did not end up being our biological ancestors. So we are coasting on the, rewards of having been descended from so many winners in the game of having children and keeping those children alive and giving those children the skills they need to have their own children and keep those children alive and so on and so forth. So there's a really spectacular legacy of success in the world at surviving even through very egregious circumstances that comes from every one of our ancestors, in some way or another. They at least live long enough to reproduce, and in many cases live long enough to, keep their children alive, one parent or the other or the community, but, someone successfully did that, and then so on and so forth. And we've spent a lot longer being hunter-gatherer people and sustenance farmer people than we have being this interesting modern configuration. Corporations are something that our ancestors didn't have a reference for. And I think the amount of choice and opportunity and freedom and ability to choose again that the modern world creates with so many pathways to being able to make money is really potent, but it can also be very complicated in other ways. So, pros and cons. I personally love living in the modern era, but I remember that I'm running around with hunter-gatherer biology. And one of the things that I really am determined about for myself is not having so much of my actions controlled by an impulse where something has skillfully tapped into a reward system. So that's where, a lot of capitalism is driven by marketing, which is about making people feel perhaps an uncomfortable feeling, make people afraid and then sell them something, make people angry, then sell them something. There's this, movement, and then you sell them the solution and often pair it with music and visuals and high status people and all these things that are very potent in terms of our brain's rewards. I love geeking out on lots of books in this regard. I really liked one called Popular, The Power of Likability in a Status Obsessed Society, to just kind of break down how our brain lies to us about the importance of status. And for sure, it was in hunter-gatherer communities, but the cool thing about the modern era is if we're born into a tribe that is either dysfunctional or harmful to us, or just straight up misaligned, not interested in exploring a tribal culture that we like, in terms of our family of origin, we can choose again, and then we can choose again after that. And we have this enormous opportunity to leave jobs and leave living situations and leave tribes of people who are, not treating us or others in a way that really works for us. And that's really cool. But if we want to make those kind of moves, we do have to overcome some chemistry that is howling that we're going to die alone in the wilderness. I don't know if you can find a time where you agonized over making a change that you knew would be life-affirming and healthy and clearly the right thing, and here are all the warning flags, and I just need to get out of it, and it was so hard, and you procrastinated and you struggled and you strategized to try to make it work, and it seemed really terrifying, and finally you made the shift. Sometimes we make the shift voluntarily. Sometimes our misaligned vibration makes the shift for us. So the partner or the workplace ends up being the one to break up with us, or circumstances change. And then on the other side of it, the thing that seems so terrifying was not such a big deal after all. And I just find that really interesting. And I think it's useful to kind of note those moments when you were like, I was so scared to make this jump. I was so anxious and frightened and tense. And yet on the other side of it, it wasn't really that bad. Other possibilities opened up. And sometimes we make a change and we're like, wow, I learned something. I really thought this was going to work. And as it turns out, it's not my jam. I should get back to choosing again. And that's totally valid as well. Ideally, we don't, routinely risk all of our life savings on things that we haven't, gotten to proof of concept on. But, different things for different people. For me, it was very supportive to keep my engineering job and keep cutting my hours while I built this practice that I'm so in love with. But other people might make a more dynamic move. And so tolerance for discomfort, of course, makes a difference in how we navigate things like this. But one of the things that I think happens when we get out of touch with our connection to our soul and our essence and our uniqueness. So I'm including the unique soul that came in with all the intentions and desires that you might have had for this incarnation, but also our unique humanness, the things that formed us, the ancestors we ended up with, the cool things about our family traditions that we love or cherish, or, what is uniquely human about us, those satisfactions. For example, I really like crafting. I've done beadwork. I've made candles. I sew. I knit. There are all these things that creating something is really nourishing and satisfying and delicious to me on some level. And I would say that that's, my personal nervous system in relationship to beauty and to creativity and to flow state and focus. And there's just a lot that comes together that is specific to me that makes that so satisfying. So I don't want to discriminate, like some people really get caught up in my soul has a mission and I have to figure out what that is. And that's totally fine. But I think that this soul pleasure and human pleasure that I'm talking about is just dropping into the more authentic version. So it could be being really present with a good cup of tea. I live in San Diego. We get a lot of really sunny days. It's finally starting to intermittently turn to fall in late October as I record this. And after many lovely sunny days, we finally have a cloudy, moody day where water might or might not fall from the sky. And I woke up recognizing that it was a Saturday and I get to be in the coziness of my home with this weather outside and really authentically enjoying this. So I believe what happens to us when we get disconnected from presence with our body and presence with our soul essence is that there's a part of us that's scrambling for pleasure and relief, but there's nothing providing the adult supervision. So that's when we get into these cycles where we maybe overspend. Buying something online gives us a dopamine hit. There's reward chemistry, which makes sense. Be good hunter-gatherers. It's work to pick up that really useful stick that will make a really good bow and carry it back to the tribe. And even if you're not a hunter, if you give it to a hunter, he'll be pleased with you. So there's social rewards. There's brain chemistry. It makes sense. It makes sense that we have a lot of reward chemistry for connecting with other people. But then we end up kind of hammering on these buttons, pushing refresh over and over and over again on our smartphone for whatever app. It could be Instagram or Facebook or a dating app or a shopping kind of thing or gambling or, something that is kind of activating the brain. This can show up with food. I notice when my sugar cravings go way up or I'm craving a lot more caffeine. And I think when we leave ourselves and get disconnected from a life that doesn't have that richness of soul pleasure, we start mindlessly reaching for things that really activate reward chemistry. A few weeks ago, I had a new potential romantic connection, and there's a lot of chemistry that goes with that first flush of really liking someone. And I noticed that my desire to get a little more mindful about my eating. I don't particularly find that a super rigid kind of thing works for me, but I was starting to find that, I aspire to improve my eating, as I get older so that I stay in, feeling really good in my body and what my body would tolerate 5 years ago and now may look a little bit different. So I took advantage of this massive dose of delightful chemistry about having a crush on someone to just ease back on the sugar because I already had all this chemistry flowing, so I wasn't as inclined to go into the kitchen and grab something to alleviate boredom. And again, at the same time, I was really working with myself about that chemistry of, okay, come back to present and make sure you get really good sleep because, I was struggling to sleep because I was, really, really wound up. I'm somebody who's really sensitive to chemistry. Not everybody is, but oxytocin, I really notice after I've had good connection with someone how much I think about them the next day and how much a text from them produces massive dumps of chemistry of excitement and joy, which is nice. But then if the text message doesn't come, which doesn't always happen because people have busy modern lives, there's this upset and, kinds of things. And I just really notice how big doses of chemistry are expensive to me. And one of the through lines of my life has been being less addictive about not so much external chemistry as internal chemistry, making choices that amplified up, and then I would wear myself out, and then I'd have this really big crash, and then the thing that will jumpstart your chemistry kind of requires bigger doses if you're legit tired because you've been on this chemistry wheel. And so for me, there's been a lot of grace in my life of just not seeking out so much chemistry in terms of all of these experiences. And I think it's really useful. I'm giving you some of insight into my life, but I think it's really useful to conduct a review of your internal drug of choice. Like I really like how coffee makes me feel. And so I really keep myself on a budget with coffee, and I find that the half-life just lasts a really long time. It doesn't feel like a lot when I'm trying to get moving in the morning after a really intense dream time, but in that winding down to go to sleep, I may just kind of not drop off as well if I've had coffee afternoon. And so there's just a knowledge of that, but then I don't tend to be particularly compelled by something like alcohol because I'm usually wishing I had more energy and excitement than I actually do, whereas someone who's running more of the anxiety circuit might find a glass of wine really compelling and need to supervise themselves so that didn't get out of hand. So I think it's a really useful exercise to just have a conversation with yourself about what is my internal drug of choice? How do I hack my own chemistry in order to produce a feeling, a favorite feeling, a way that I like to feel? This is embarrassing to admit, but one of the things I'll catch myself doing occasionally in the shower, not as much recently, but I would notice that I'm very careful not to go back over perceived slights or times when my feelings got hurt, because I know how much that establishes neural pathways, and I don't want to be mad about, somebody who was rude to me in a parking lot, 2 years ago on an ongoing basis. So given that I catch myself pretty quickly, I'm pretty disciplined about, I'm cycling on something. I'm constructing a story that makes people bad and wrong. Let's get a Byron Katie worksheet going. So I create the mental space to say, all right, I really didn't like that experience with them, but they weren't innately a horrible person for doing it. They just might not be someone I ever want to see again in my whole life. So there's this, this work that I do. But what I caught myself doing instead was imagining a scenario where someone threatened me or was rude to me or that I needed to deal with, and then imagining how I would deal with this very stressful, intense, perhaps confrontational situation. And I'm somebody who doesn't like confrontation. I'm very boundaried, and I'm very capable of sitting with the awkward and allowing myself to just say, for example, on a first date to somebody when I've realized I don't really want to see this person again, wow, thank you so much for showing up. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad I got to meet you. I just don't feel like it's a good thing to go forward, but I appreciate your time. And, and then just being in silence as they take in, because, it's, in some ways not flattering to the ego, but better when it's mutual. And it's kind of hard when they were, getting excited about a connection. And certainly I've been on the other side of that, where I was really excited about something and the other person wasn't. And I really hate the uncertainty of someone who doesn't feel like they can cough up the truth. So they say they'll call and then they never do. And in fairness, sometimes people, review it and then change their mind down the line. And men or women, you probably think whatever gender you date is worse about it because of the experience. But I think both are really bad about that, just being direct and embracing the awkward. So I'm capable of doing that. But confrontation, while I'm capable of it, is, again, it's a lot of chemistry. It's hard on my nervous system. It's useful to spot people who are always trying to pick an argument. They're always trying to stir the pot and get people wound up and, say the provocative things so people, argue with them. They enjoy that chemistry. I think some people don't enjoy that chemistry but are really compelled by it. I know I've gotten into, intense intellectual discussions that I wasn't much enjoying because I kind of bit the hook. I'm like, no, wrongness has been spoken. This perspective is so important, rather than going with kind of the more mature, like, wow, I have a lot of wisdom to share. Are they receptive? If not, maybe save my breath. The podcast is an elegant way. You guys can turn it off if you find me tedious in whatever way. But if it's useful, those people will sort and listen through to what I have to say. And that's wonderful. But in imagining these confrontations, what I realized when I was reaching for that without even thinking about it, this is half asleep in the shower, was those times where I had a really intense dream time. And I imagine that for some of you listening, there's the experience of like, do I really need a cast of like 100 different characters and 27 different settings to work out whatever my brain is trying to work out in the dream time? I don't always dream that intensely, but I tend to get a lot of elaborate, nuanced, technicolor, a lot of players, a lot of places, a lot of vignettes playing out. There's just a lot that can happen in the dream time. And when I have one of those really intense nights, I tend to wake up kind of groggy. It's hard to get moving, and I have a business to run and I have commitments. So I need my brain to work. And so in that bleary, in the shower place, my brain reaches for indignation because it's an adrenaline shot to the system. We can hack our own adrenaline with our thoughts. And honestly, one of the things that I think is just tragic for modern humans who suffer from loneliness, who are trying to connect, who are trying to sustain successful relationships, is that the chemistry of anger for most of us feels a lot better than the chemistry with sadness or grief or fatigue. And so a lot of us have a lot of different ways of, numbing. And we have internal, we can do it with our thinking. We have external. There are substances like sugar or alcohol that will shift our chemistry and shift our experience. We have an enormous number of distractions, movies we can watch, apps we can buy, online shopping we can do. There's an accessibility, back when I was, in my 20s, if I wanted something, I pretty much had to go to the store. The Amazon was not, rocking and rolling, or if it was, it wasn't on my radar. And so there was a need to overcome my introversion and go forth to acquire the thing, which, living in San Diego, there were a lot of stores close by, but at the same time, it surely cut out boredom or browsing shopping. So I want to be really clear that I'm not subscribing to really extreme approaches to this. For you, you may find that if I have any sugar, I desperately crave sugar, and so it's better just not to go there because my body has such a physiological reaction that I'm going to leak a lot of energy arguing with myself about that. So if your head gets loud, with moderation. I think moderation is great as long as you have the physical health to sustain moderation, or the economic health, or just things are working well enough in your life that moderate indulgence in your chemistry drug of choice isn't going to hurt anything. Like, I have no problem with a bit of Facebook, and I know I'm hacking my reward chemistry, and occasionally, I might be on Etsy looking at pretty things and thinking about buying them for the reward chemistry of that. That's all fine in moderation, but if you find that staying with moderation for something makes your head really loud, you're doing a ton of arguing with yourself, because the human mind can rationalize anything. And if there's something that's really disrupting your life and it would really be impactful, your mind will still come up with a rationalization. It's in service to the tension of your instincts. I think it's wild to understand why for some people, having already enjoyed a donut that somebody brought or a muffin, and knowing that there are extra donuts or muffins in the break room around lunchtime or afternoon, and they're probably not as good because they're probably a little stale, but there's that muffin or that donut, and it's calling to you, and it keeps, coming back and coming back. And it seems really crazy that the snack machine would call to you, the vending machine. I certainly had this when I would hit that afternoon slump. And the thing about that is as a hunter-gatherer person with insecure access to food, leaving food to spoil because we couldn't store food, there, was a lot of going hungry. In fact, the number one sexual attractor for a man for a woman, statistically speaking, is still shiny hair, because it meant she had enough body fat to carry a child. So men who were into characteristics that weren't shiny hair were less likely to have viable pregnancies that resulted in a living, healthy child. But that unclaimed food where nobody in the tribe is going to be mad at you for eating it, that's going to spoil anyway, when you don't know where your next meal is coming from, especially if you have low-level stress or anxiety, your instincts think you're doing a stupid, life-threatening thing by not going and eating that donut or muffin, even though it's a little stale. And it's darn useful to know that there's just this tension that you're managing that then is put into service to rationalize an action that maybe isn't super aligned for you. And again, I don't want to pick on, you should never eat donuts or you should never have caffeine or sugar or a glass of wine. It's just starting to notice where the chemistry, whether you're creating it internally or finding something that is a quick button push of that chemistry that activates it for you, because you might go out of choice and be compelled to do it over and over again. And I think the more that we have this sort of hollow chemistry, I think it takes us away from authentic soul pleasure and authentic human pleasure. I really enjoyed the little book of Hugin, which talks about the Danish concepts of coziness and connection. And, there's a lot that gets unpacked under that concept. And the Danes tend to score as some of the happiest people in the world. Americans, people in the UK, not so much. And so even with all of the privilege and luxury and opportunities of the modern world, I don't think our happiness is as significant as that. And I think that the more kind of, we talk about empty calories in certain kinds of food that don't really nourish our bodies. There's sort of this empty pleasure hits. And if we're hammering on those over and over again, we don't end up having a sensitivity and a responsiveness to kind of this more subtle pleasure that is more fulfilling, that really makes us want to be here. Because there's kind of Facebook hits these rewards, but there's a lot of research that says Facebook actually can make you feel really lonely and disconnected if you have it in your life in a way that's out of balance. I like Facebook. I'm not deleting my account anytime soon, but there's an awareness that if I get overly engaged in it, overall, I'm probably going to feel more unhappy. And these chemistry spikes tend to have a drop on the other side. And I just think it's really useful to be aware of that and to recognize that seeking out authentic pleasure may take a little more effort. So there's kind of this delayed gratification because these pleasure rewards are meant to make us move and do something real time. They're meant to make us seek connection right now. You're tired. It's a beautiful summer day, but they're berries, binge eat berries. I was just in Alaska and the bears were just eating salmon and eating salmon and eating salmon and packing on all this weight because then they hibernate. They actually have their babies in the den with zero food and they produce the milk and they go through this really intense process of growing babies, giving birth to babies, nursing babies without any food intake during that time. So for hunter-gatherer people, if you put on some extra weight when food was more plentiful, you were more likely to survive the winter. And so these chemistry hits are really about take immediate action. And what we're wanting is ideally to back up and really see where the rewards are for what makes us happy and fulfilled and start strategizing, weaving that in. And there might be lots of things, but you can look for the low-hanging fruit. This particular cup of tea is delightful, or I love the beauty of a Pinterest board, or you could look at more long-term things like, if if I get to the beach, if I live somewhere near it a couple of times a week and I get to look at the ocean, that really regulates my nervous system and is very fulfilling. Or let me get plans on the calendar with this person that I love seeing, but neither of us is a good initiator, so we don't get together as much. There's this kind of opportunity. And I feel like the more holistic, authentic pleasure that really feeds us, the more robust our life wish is. So our desire to be here is increased. The more choice we have in our life, the more our nervous system regulates itself, because a lot of chemistry spikes kind of deregulate the nervous system. And when our nervous system is calm, our brains work in a completely different way than when our fight or flight is activated, even at a very low level. So there's just a lot of really, really kind of leaning into, where do I get things that really cause authentic, holistic pleasure for my human self, for my soul? What are the things that are really needs met and really satisfying, so that you can start to ideally weave those into your life more and kind of get ahead? Because I think we crave those quick hits of pleasure to the point that it damages our experience in some way much more strongly when we don't have that authentic pleasure. And if you're just in a life where you're kind of in a season of embrace the suck, like, oh wow, somebody's in the hospital today, or I'm on deadline, so, I'm going to be really out of balance with work for a week or so, there's a time where you could also just use a little more willpower. You can say, this deadline's really hard. It feels like giving myself permission to eat whatever I want. And that's okay. It's valid if you take that strategy. But if your body's sensitive, it might cost you even more. Like eating the not so healthy food in stress state costs our bodies more at a biological level than eating the not so healthy food not in stress state. It's, as I understand it, the French paradox where, the French eat all this cheese and drink all this wine and aren't having heart disease like Americans. And, they're like, what gives? This is supposed to be a terrible diet. But they're making food a ritual and sitting down and savoring it and, being still in digestion and eating in community. And there are all these other things that provide the context, which, science will tell us gives the body, depending, mileage varies by individual, but gives you more resilience to things that in stress state could cause a lot of problems over time. So one of the coolest things I came across in regards to this is The Science of Well-Being. It's a Yale course, and I just got a huge kick out of all the science of happiness and what it tells us about ways we might believe something that's just straight up not true. I don't think we're so different and special that we would be the exception, that after a certain point of wealth, there'd be this massive correlation to greater happiness. Like, for sure, below a certain level, more money does create more happiness. And after a certain point, there just isn't really a correlation. And I think that's a really useful thing to know, because our brain, especially if we're having some misery around money stress, are likely to hammer on the more money, more money, more money, and not really have an enough button, or not really have a, if I can get to this place, that would not be a problem. I would have fulfilled as much happiness as money could provide. Any more of that, there's a diminishing rate of returns, especially if I have to come out of work-life balance and work a lot harder for it. So this is a good balance for my life. That's a useful thing to know about yourself. So I want to end on something that may seem like a total non sequitur, but my guides keep kind of dropping it in as a fun thing to mention or include in this rambling discussion of chemistry. So I have a kitty cat, and outside in the yard in the house that I live, it's a shared yard, and there are these delightful neighbor dogs. There are 2 Chihuahuas and 2 boxers, and if I ever want to feel popular, I have only to step out of my sliding glass door, and dogs will run from all parts of the yard to get petted and paid attention to. And in fact, they will come look through my sliding glass door and wag their tails and attempt to entice me to come out on a regular basis. They come and seek me out. And one of the things that I find really interesting in regards to how different these animals are is dogs get rewards in their brain for humans being pleased with them. So if you say, good dog, they get the same kind of happy chemicals that we get if someone on Facebook that we think has high status pays attention to us or admires us. And that's really advantageous because dogs are responding to people and there's an opportunity for partnership and they get fed and bred. And, dogs that didn't much care probably aren't the dogs that are domesticated and kind of in the modern era. So I don't even take out snacks or treats to the dogs. It's just my petting and loving on them and adoring them is, high value. They get really excited. And it's not that I don't give good pet, but there's reward chemistry in the brain. Whereas my belief, I haven't validated this with any kind of science, but my belief is that kitty cats do not have rewards in their brain biochemically for humans being pleased with them. I don't think that that's part of the reward chemistry. So if a cat likes you, you're just on your own. You just, are about figuring out what they like and want. And, my cat comes and, wants to be petted and rewards me with purring. I think she's a lot more tapped into my biochemistry rewards. I'm like, oh, cat is purring, prettiness, more petting. There's a, in terms of the relationship. If you're looking for this, I think cats are really good role models because they really are in touch with what's right for them at any given moment in time. And my particular cat is really balanced. She's not particularly food motivated. She eats the right amount to, be healthy. She likes to be petted and then she's done. She likes sleeping in comfortable places. There's just a movement through the world of a lot of clarity in what's good for her. And as humans who live in communities, we can't always move completely in touch with what's right for us in every given moment. There are a lot of constraints. If you have children, you need to keep the children alive, even if the best thing in the world would be to lock yourself in the bathroom and have a good cry because toddlers are hard. But I don't want us ever to lose the thread of being in touch with what's truly, authentically the right thing for us outside of people pleasing, outside of what will the neighbors think, outside of perfectionism, like all these things that drive us. I want to invite you to commit to not losing the thread of that because it's an important voice to put into the conversation that you're weaving through all the options for how you do life. There are a lot of different ways to navigate toddlers. I don't know what they are because I don't have babies, but my sister has been very resourceful and sometimes it's worked better and sometimes it's gotten out of hand, and I think she did just, want to curl up in the bathtub and cry. She, on the whole, is a very, very fulfilled, engaged mother, but I see her being in constant research and development to have it be good for everyone, to have it be good for her husband, for the kids, and that thread of what's the either low-hanging fruit that helps me thrive or the things that have really good return on investment. So for me, quality touch has really good return on investment for my well-being and my state of mind. It fills me up in a really profound way. And so knowing that when we do have the space and the time and the choice, even if we can't always have everything and always move in the way that's best for us, being with that thread, I think, is really important. And one of the things I've done to get good at tracking it is some solo travel to places that I wasn't on the move. So there is a hot springs that I used to go to called Harbin Hot Springs. They're still around. Lovely, lovely place. But I went on some personal retreats where I was just there away from my daily life, just soaking in the pools and sitting in nature and eating delicious food. But I could be with let me be in stillness until I feel called to move, and let me move until I feel called to stillness, and let impulses arrive, and let me just be really present with that. What is delicious and good for me now? And I don't think we necessarily get a lot of time naturally in our busy, committed lives to trace that thread. And so learning how to how to turn up the volume dial on that and find it internally, I think is really useful. And I think one of the first steps to getting there is starting to notice what chemistry you like, how you hack your own chemistry, either with your thinking or with your actions that you're taking or things that you're consuming, whether it's food-wise or content-wise, so that you can start to create spaces where you're not spiking your chemistry over and over again. There was that experiment with the rats where, they put electrodes to stimulate the orgasmic center of the rat's brain, and the rat just pounded on the lever that produced this over and over and over again and didn't eat and didn't drink. And someone else came in and said, I don't think that was a fair test. It was in this really boring cage all by itself. What if we put it in an amazing rat habitat where it has rat friends and places to go and interesting things to eat and this really dynamic world that is really great? And what they found is, sure, the rats swung by and hit the lever, but they didn't come out of balance. They didn't hammer on it all day. And I think that's a really useful thing to notice, that when we're in balance, sure, we can enjoy the thing that produces chemistry we like. I certainly enjoy my cup of coffee. Sometimes at night, I even look forward to the fact that I'll be starting the day with a cup of coffee. But we aren't hammering on that, because the trouble with that is if we lose authentic soul and human pleasure, we end up just needing to get higher and more intense doses of the artificial hack our internal chemistry pleasure. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this has you asking some interesting questions. These are certainly questions I've been walking with for a number of years, and I find really, really interesting to understand about myself before I start strategizing what big picture changes I need to make in my world. It's kind of the, move the internal, but also the external. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.